Prime Minister Narendra Modi to participate in the 12th BRICS summit today. The theme of the summit is global sustainability, shared security and innovative development. Summit being held in a virtual format to discuss on cooperation in the war against terror, trade, energy, health and tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. India to take over BRICS leadership for 2021. Union Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad accuses Congress leaders of a kickback on Augusta Westland VVIP chopper case, says no deal without a deal, no contract without a cut for Congress leaders. Union Home Minister Amit Shah in a tweet attacks Congress party and Gupkar alliance of taking Jammu Kashmir back to the era of terror and turmoil. Home Minister asserts Indian people will no longer tolerate an unholy global Gathbandhan against our national interests. In other news, Delhi police arrests two Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists. Both terrorists are from Jammu and Kashmir and the terrorists had come to Delhi for conspiracy reportedly. 4-day-long second phase of exercise Malabar 2020 begins in the Northern Arabian Sea from today. The second phase exercise involves coordinated operations of increasing complexity between the navies of India, Australia, Japan and the US. And country's fight against COVID-19 continues. Colleges open in Karnataka from today after 8 months of pandemic shutdown. Number of recoveries more than fresh cases for 44th consecutive day, leading to further rise in recovery rate to 93.27%. Global COVID-19 cases rise to more than 5.5 crore with more than 13.3 lakh deaths reported. Namaskar and welcome. And as we stay standby for the BRICS summit, the virtual BRICS summit, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in fact, is expected to make his comments at around 4:43 p.m. We're going to cut live to those visuals, but my colleague Amrit Pal joins us from the newsroom to talk about the larger deliverables, the messaging and the broader areas of concerns. In fact, Amrit is there with us. Amrit, very quickly, in around 5-6 minutes, we're going to go live over to BRICS Virtual Summit. The significance of it from India's standpoint, and also this BRICS Summit, the Virtual BRICS Summit, taking place in the backdrop of pandemic response, especially in this case, of course, the BRICS grouping.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is today that it's happening in times of COVID. These are very, very different times in which it will require a very different or unusual response to the pandemic, and I think that would take center stage at today's summit, dealing with it collectively, the limiting the damage that it's caused and the offsetting the impact of COVID, whether on the health of the populations of these nations, which comprise of about 43% of the world's population. Also, the economy that it's disrupted, getting that back on track, using the intra-BRIC linkages, leveraging them to mutual and benefit of these countries, and thus with of the rest of the world, and reviving the global economy. In times when during this pandemic, big countries like the G7, G20 have turned inward. BRICS is one forum which would try and assert its usefulness and importance and significance in the world, given the landmass that these countries cover, given the amount of population that these countries combine, given the GDP. They are about 1/3 of the world's GDP. So I think today when the leaders of the BRICS countries speak at this summit, that's what they will be attempting, how to deal with the pandemic from an economic front, from the health front, and also the future in terms of vaccine development, vaccine production, vaccine distribution. So I think this is what will be talked about majorly in this evening's summit. Sakal?
specific point of the counter-terror measures, and Prime Minister in the we've seen in various platforms, international platforms, have he has made those strong comments of respecting each other's sovereign and territorial integrity. Whether it was his remarks in SCO summit, and after BRICS, in fact, is going to be another G20 round as well. So that point on India's strong position vis-a-vis counter-terror measures and cooperation amongst the BRICS grouping when it comes to terror financing and curbing the terror states.
Yes, you've raised two issues. Yes, these will seek prominence from an India standpoint, and I think the Indian Prime Minister would be is expected to bring that up in his speech at the BRICS plenary. One on counter-terrorism. The Prime Minister has been stressing that counter-terrorism requires a joint strategy. If you look at what he spoke at the Brazil, at the 11th summit, which was held in Brazil, he raised this issue saying that terrorism is something that affects the whole world, and we need a joint response to that because of the very nature of the transnational terrorism that prevails in the world today. You'll be sitting somewhere, you actually don't need to go to that country to disrupt that country's systems. You can have local modules, and that's the module that terrorist organization, terrorist linkages are working on, and it requires a joint multilateral response to that. So I think the Prime Minister would be stressing on that keeping aside individual interests, nations would have to unitedly fight this. Crack on terror financing, organized crime, drug trafficking. He said drug trafficking and organized crime are the biggest disruptors of development today, and I think we could see that position being reflected in the Prime Minister's statement or the Prime Minister's speech at the BRICS plenary today. Apart from that, what you referred to about the Prime Minister speaking at the SCO saying the nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be addressed and must be respected. Yes. This was, the first time when after the standoff, the military standoff going on the border, Indo-China border, that the Prime Minister was in the same summit as the Chinese president. And this evening it will be the second time that he will be facing off the Chinese president, though virtually. But I think the Prime Minister, I wouldn't be surprised if the Prime Minister makes a similar reference that he made, because it's been 6 months despite the two militaries talking, despite the two military commanders talking to each other, this issue has not been resolved. So I think the Prime Minister could touch upon that. Zakal?
Yes, this is expected to witness discussions around intra-BRICS cooperation, but the China aspect that you talked about, and this is going to be perhaps the second time when Prime Minister Modi is going to come face to face with Chinese President Xi Jinping. But no direct reference, but yes, India, this of course, like you mentioned, comes in the backdrop of what we have seen what happened in Galwan. This will further give Indian Prime Minister the platform to further consolidate India's position, India's standpoint on border dispute vis-a-vis China, and I think India has made its stand very, very clear. Do you think there's going to be an indirect reference to that again?
I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up in the Prime Minister's speech, though this is a plurilateral forum where bilateral issues are not discussed, and the Prime Minister will be participating in the plenary session which begins in a little while from now. But and there are no bilaterals, unlike a physical meeting where polar sides or bilaterals can be scheduled, or there's a window to that. Because of the virtual format, that window does not exist here. But in his session, in his speech, the Prime Minister could touch upon that, because that is the message that the Prime Minister will be sending across, not just to China but also to the grouping. In a grouping as small as 5 countries, if 2 major countries, China and India, have some sort of a dispute, a standoff, or a tense position going on between themselves, it does affect the larger settings of the grouping. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if the Prime Minister uses this forum to send a message across, though even if he does, it will be a veiled reference to that, because the Prime Minister on one hand would be arguing for taking a united stand, but yes, India's concerns he could put across for the rest of the grouping
Do you
members
think that
to
sort of would once again put some sort of pressure on China? Though you mentioned on such forums, bilateral disengagement don't really, I mean, they don't encourage discussions on the bilateral disagreements with each other. Yes, that's not part of the agenda. But then diplomatically speaking, it's going to actually put China not in the back foot, but some sort of pressure building on it.
When Vladimir Putin listens to Narendra Modi speak at the summit, you know, it obviously has a bearing on his mind. And when Vladimir Putin gets a world view, Xi Jinping has to bother about it. So it's that sort of a pressure, Sakal, really. You know, here you have 5 leading and emerging economies, they're heads of state or heads of government. So when each one of them speaks, the other listens very intently and understands the position. So I think that sort of a diplomatic pressure does, it exerts that sort of a pressure. And the message goes across not just to the individual country but also to the grouping. So it is in that sense you're using that fora to get across your point, and I think the Prime Minister could utilize this forum for sending that point across.
And Amrit, next year India is going to take over as a chair, you know, so in that sense also this is very significant from India's
point of view. That's right, it happens by rotation. The next year's chairmanship belongs to India. India will be hosting the next or the 13th BRICS summit in 2021. We don't know what the situation then would be if the pandemic passes, and you know, there would be a physical summit, or would it still be a virtual summit? But yes, the chairship goes to India. It's done twice held this position twice in the past, once in 2012. The other time in 2016, since the inception of the grouping, first as BRIC and later as BRICS after South Africa joined in 2010. Yes, India would be taking that, and this comes in the backdrop of the 75th anniversary of the UN. We heard the Prime Minister address the UN General Assembly. So it's at a very, very critical time that India takes this leadership position. The world will be very clearly, it's not just these 5 leaders, but I think the world will be listening very intently to what these heads of government or state have to say.
And particularly the BRICS nation keenly going to watch out and listen to Prime Minister Modi's speech, considering the fact, Amrit, you would agree, the way India has managed right from the outset or outbreak of this pandemic, stayed much ahead of the curve. When the other countries are forcing the second or the third wave of lockdown, India has opened up considerably, economically, socially, otherwise also. So in that sense of term, BRICS nations, BRICS grouping looking up to India under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. They would
be at least watching very, very closely. The fact of the matter is that we've been hit, and we've been hit hard.
Yes.
We ranked number 2 after US in terms of total deaths and infections. Brazil closely behind us in the number of I think deaths after the US. Our population is so high, is so much that we've been hit. But yes, there are lessons to be learned about how the country how India has handled this. The quick response to it, the recovery rate, which is one of the best. We've not seen we've been not hit as bad, though in numbers we might be high, but in terms of percentage, when you compare the population, we are doing pretty well as compared to the West. So the way you've come where you've come from, where you started. When you started, you did not have enough testing facilities. The way you've quickly ramped that up, the multi-mode strategy of test, track and treat, how you've successfully implemented that, how you've been able to cut your losses economically. Yes, you were hit. The lockdown did hit you.
Yes.
There were job losses. The economy saw a downturn. But how you're working on the revival model is something which the other nations would find interesting. And I think the Prime Minister would be putting that out and saying that we can work on these, we can leverage our linkages, our intra-BRICS cooperation to help each other tide over this crisis, because it's a crisis which is not hit an individual country, it is hit beyond borders. COVID, the virus does not need a passport to travel. So everybody is hit equally, and everybody's been hit badly. Economy has been disrupted. How to restart that economy? And when countries like China, India, Brazil, Russia, when they restart their economy, the world, it affects the world. So the world watches you very, very closely. I think the world leaders or capitals around the world would be listening to very closely and intently to what Prime Minister Modi has to say today.
Amrit, also later in the evening, Prime Minister is going to address the annual Bloomberg New Economy Forum. Just to put that in perspective, what is expected?
The Prime Minister is basically going to touch upon how businesses can look at revival, how the economy, the economic sector can revive itself, how the need for for a trade push to leveraging the trade ties that exist around the world, and how to give it a push, especially in the services sector. So I think the Prime Minister that part would be looking at containing the damage and offsetting the damage or the impact of COVID in terms of sheer economic terms, and how we can leverage what we already have to get out of the pandemic and to save the sort of economic downturn that we've seen, to pave a way forward. I think the Prime Minister would be putting out his vision out there.
And also a bit of a perspective as far as the space, the trade coordination, cooperation amongst the BRICS grouping is concerned.
Well, trade, as you know, BRICS started, or the earlier BRIC and later BRICS started out as an economic forum. And you did pretty well in faring and showing your resilience with dealing with the economic meltdown of 2008, 2009. And you fared pretty well as compared to the Western countries. You have huge trade linkages. You are a big market. All of you are, as a combined market, you are perhaps one of the largest markets that exist around in the world. So trade, if you strengthen these trade linkages to each other's advantage, you strengthen your resilience, and it has an impact on the global economy. After all, you comprise of about 33–34% of the world's GDP. So I think trade is going to be one of the major focuses, because that is what the basic premise on which this grouping was formed. Sakal?
Amrit, just to sum it up, we're going to go live just in few seconds. But for India, from India's standpoint, the way India has led the world COVID response, this BRICS summit and our Prime Minister's representation there, his intervention, assume a lot of significance.
Absolutely. The Prime Minister would be putting out how a country like India, with such a large population, a country which generally lacks the sort of health infrastructure that we see in the West, has fared in dealing with the pandemic. We've seen countries like the United States, which have far better health infrastructure, fare far worse than India, because you acted in time, you took the right measures at the right time. And how you need to carry your population with you, your people with you, to find the Prime Minister to fight this pandemic. The Prime Minister has time and again said that it wouldn't have been possible without the people's will, and he saluted the will of the Indian people. So I think the Prime Minister is going to put out what the strategy of India was, and is going to putting out the future strategy, because you have a vaccine which is at the stage of still being tested in laboratories. Once that vaccine's effectivity is proved, then the question of joint or mass production, then mass distribution for massive populations, for countries of the size of, say, India, China, Brazil, it's not easy. So I think the Prime Minister is going to put out his vision, is going to appeal to the rest of the countries to work on a joint strategy to deal with this, so that we can collectively find this pandemic, which has not only hit our populations, it's hit populations around the world, and it's disrupted economies. The Prime Minister is also going to lay out his vision of how to kickstart, because that's the biggest question staring the world leaders in the face, that how to kickstart the global economy, which has been greatly dented due to this pandemic. It's completely disrupted. You haven't seen such sort of a pandemic in about 100 years. The closest that you saw was probably the Spanish flu. And at that time, the economic models that you had were very, very different from. It was a very different world that we live in. This is a more global. It's a much more global village that we live in today. Of the intra-linkages that you have. So I think the Prime Minister is going to put that out today in his speech today at the BRICS plenary.
As we say, stand by to cut live to those visuals. A quick one, Amrit, on the economic space, the economic component, which is very important, because in your report also you've mentioned that the BRICS grouping in fact accounts for the 30% of the global GDP. And this BRICS grouping represents 40% of the world population. And economically, every part of the globe has been badly hit. The revival plan of the BRICS grouping and how India can lead the way there as well. Do you think that's going to also be one of the major talking points?
Absolutely. That will take center stage. I think health of the populations, dealing with the pandemic in sheer terms of health, and the other thing would be trade and economy and reviving that global economy. I think the Prime Minister could lay out his vision of what he sees the way ahead is, the road ahead is, and
okay,
how
Amrit, I'm going to just intervene here, Amrit, because let's quickly take you live as Prime Minister is addressing virtual BRICS summit now.
Please, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Rashtrapati Putin, Your Excellency, Rashtrapati Xi, Your Excellency, Rashtrapati Ramaphosa, Your Excellency, Rashtrapati Bolsonaro, सबसे पहले मैं ब्रिक्स के सफल संचालन के लिए राष्ट्रपति पुतिन को बधाई देता हूं। आपके गाइडेंस और इनिशिएटिव की वजह से वैश्विक महामारी के समय में भी ब्रिक्स अपनी गति को बरकरार रख पाया है। अपनी बात आगे रखने से पहले मैं प्रेसिडेंट रामाफोसा को जन्मदिवस की शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। एक्सेलेंसीज, इस साल के समिट का थीम ब्रिक्स पार्टनरशिप फॉर ग्लोबल स्टेबिलिटी, शेयर्ड सिक्योरिटी एंड इनोवेटिव ग्रोथ प्रासंगिक तो है ही, किंतु दूरदर्शी भी है। विश्व में महत्वपूर्ण जियो स्ट्रैटेजिक बदलाव आ रहे हैं, जिनका प्रभाव स्टेबिलिटी, सिक्योरिटी और ग्रोथ पर पड़ना और पड़ता रहेगा। और इन तीनों क्षेत्रों में ब्रिक्स की भूमिका अहम होगी। एक्सेलेंसीज, इस वर्ष दूसरे विश्व युद्ध की 75वीं वर्षगांठ पर हम वीर गति पाए सैनिकों को श्रद्धांजलि देते हैं। भारत से भी 2.5 मिलियन से अधिक वीर इस युद्ध में यूरोप, अफ्रीका और साउथ ईस्ट एशिया जैसे कई फ्रंट्स पर सक्रिय थे। इस वर्ष यूनाइटेड नेशंस की स्थापना की 75वीं वर्षगांठ भी है। यूएन के एक संस्थापक सदस्य के रूप में भारत मल्टीलेटरलिज्म का दृढ़ समर्थक रहा है। भारतीय संस्कृति में भी पूरे विश्व को एक परिवार की तरह माना गया है। अतः हमारे लिए यूएन जैसी संस्था का समर्थन स्वाभाविक था। यूएन के मूल्यों के प्रति हमारा कमिटमेंट अडिग रहा है। पीस कीपिंग ऑपरेशंस में सबसे अधिक वीर सैनिक भारत ने ही खोए हैं, किंतु आज मल्टीलेटरल सिस्टम एक संकट के दौर से गुजर रहा है। ग्लोबल गवर्नेंस के संस्थानों की क्रेडिबिलिटी और इफेक्टिवनेस दोनों पर ही सवाल उठ रहे हैं। इसका प्रमुख कारण यह है कि इनमें समय के साथ उचित बदलाव नहीं आया। ये अभी भी 75 साल पुराने विश्व की मानसिकता और वास्तविकता पर आधारित है। भारत का मानना है कि यूएन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में रिफॉर्म्स बहुत ही अनिवार्य है। इस विषय पर हमें अपने ब्रिक्स पार्टनर्स के समर्थन की अपेक्षा है। यूएन के अतिरिक्त कई अन्य अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थाएं भी वर्तमान वास्तविकताओं के अनुसार काम नहीं कर रहे हैं। WTO, IMF, WHO जैसे इंस्टीट्यूशंस में भी सुधार होना चाहिए। एक्सेलेंसीज, आतंकवाद आज विश्व के सामने सबसे बड़ी समस्या है। हमें यह सुनिश्चित करना होगा कि आतंकवादियों को समर्थन और सहायता देने वाले देशों को भी दोषी ठहराया जाए और इस समस्या का संगठित तरीके से मुकाबला किया जाए। हमें खुशी है कि रूस की अध्यक्षता के दौरान ब्रिक्स काउंटर टेररिज्म स्ट्रेटेजी को अंतिम रूप दे दिया गया है। यह एक महत्वपूर्ण उपलब्धि है और भारत इस कार्य को अपनी अध्यक्षता के दौरान और आगे बढ़ाएगा। एक्सेलेंसी, कोविड के बाद की वैश्विक रिकवरी में ब्रिक्स इकोनॉमीज की अहम भूमिका होगी। हमारे बीच विश्व की 42% से अधिक आबादी बसती है और हमारे देश ग्लोबल इकोनॉमी के मुख्य इंजन में से हैं। ब्रिक्स देशों के बीच आपसी व्यापार बढ़ाने का बहुत स्कोप है। हमारे आपसी संस्थाएं और सिस्टम्स जैसे ब्रिक्स, इंटरबैंक कोऑपरेशन मैकेनिज्म, न्यू डेवलपमेंट बैंक, कंटिजेंट रिजर्व अरेंजमेंट और कस्टम्स कोऑपरेशन आदि भी वैश्विक रिकवरी में हमारे योगदान को इफेक्टिव बना सकते हैं। भारत में हमने आत्मनिर्भर भारत अभियान के तहत एक व्यापक रिफॉर्म प्रोसेस शुरू किया है। यह कैंपेन इस विषय पर आधारित है कि एक सेल्फ रिलायंट और रेजिलिएंट भारत पोस्ट कोविड अर्थव्यवस्था के लिए फोर्स मल्टीप्लायर हो सकता है और ग्लोबल वैल्यू चेन्स में एक मजबूत योगदान दे सकता है। इसका उदाहरण हमने कोविड के दौरान भी देखा, जब भारतीय फार्मा उद्योग की क्षमता के कारण हम 150 से अधिक देशों को आवश्यक दवाइयां भेज पाए। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारी वैक्सीन उत्पादन और डिलीवरी क्षमता भी इस तरह मानवता के हित में काम आएगी। भारत और दक्षिण अफ्रीका ने कोविड-19 वैक्सीन उपचार तथा जांच संबंधी इंटेलेक्चुअली प्रॉपर्टी एग्रीमेंट्स में छूट दिए जाने का प्रस्ताव रखा है। हमें आशा है कि ब्रिक्स के अन्य देश भी इसका समर्थन करेंगे। अपनी ब्रिक्स अध्यक्षता के दौरान भारत डिजिटल हेल्थ और ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन में ब्रिक्स सहयोग बढ़ाने पर कार्य करेगा। इस मुश्किल वर्ष में भी रूसी अध्यक्षता में पीपल टू पीपल रिश्तों को बढ़ाने के लिए कई इनिशिएटिव्स लिए गए, जैसे कि ब्रिक्स फिल्म फेस्टिवल और युवा वैज्ञानिकों और युवा राजनयिकों की बैठकें। इसके लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति पुतिन का हार्दिक अभिनंदन करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसीज, 2021 में ब्रिक्स के 15 वर्ष पूरे हो जाएंगे। पिछले सालों में हमारे बीच लिए गए विभिन्न निर्णयों का मूल्यांकन करने के लिए हमारे शेरपा एक रिपोर्ट बना सकते हैं। 2021 में अपनी अध्यक्षता के दौरान हम ब्रिक्स के तीनों स्तंभों में इंट्रा ब्रिक्स सहयोग को मजबूत करने का प्रयत्न करेंगे। हम इंट्रा ब्रिक्स एकजुटता को बढ़ाने और इस उद्देश्य के लिए ठोस संस्थागत फ्रेमवर्क डेवलप करने का प्रयास करेंगे। मैं फिर एक बार राष्ट्रपति पुतिन के सभी प्रयासों का अभिनंदन करते हुए मेरी बात को समाप्त करता हूं। धन्यवाद।
Okay, now quickly just to recapitulate big points that Prime Minister made out there during his intervention at the BRICS virtual summit. He talked about BRICS countries, the BRICS grouping global response to containing COVID-19, where India would lead the way. He also said that India could be seen as a force multiplier in terms of COVID response of BRICS grouping and COVID containment. Prime Minister also talked about the capacity building when it comes to traditional medicine, where India will also play a very, very crucial role. Prime Minister in the beginning also made very strong pitch for India's strong support as far as multilateralism and reform of UN Security Council. Prime Minister said that India also stands for reforms in UN bodies. He also made a very strong pitch for India playing a very significant role when it comes to various UN peacekeeping missions. Prime Minister also talked about how India makes a strong pitch for reforms in UNSC, for which India would also seek support of other BRICS nations as well. And not only at the UNSC or other UN bodies, Prime Minister made a specific mention of the WTO and International Monetary Fund as well. And most importantly, Prime Minister, without taking names of any countries, called for those countries or regions who support terror should be condemned widely. He talked about finishing touches to be given to the counter-terror strategy with the help of Russia, and towards the end, Prime Minister Modi also spoke about India extending full support in the space of traditional medicines in terms of COVID containment, and how India stands firmly with the BRICS nations when it comes to intra-BRICS cooperation. We're going to talk about extensively the larger messaging, the larger optics of Prime Minister Modi's intervention at the BRICS virtual summit, which just concluded a while back. But right now it's time to wrap up this newscast. On the other side, news in Hindi. Please stay tuned with us. Namaskar.